Max and Nasha Gross had a good life in Antwerp, Belgium. He was in the diamond business and she managed the household where they were raising 3 sons, Sam, Leo, and Freddie. They had a community of friends and neighbors, and they enjoyed celebrating their Jewish faith. But one day, as a light film of blue was unfolding in the sky over the city, and a hint of the sun was preparing to break through, things quickly began to change. It was Friday, May 10th, 1940, and black clouds of smoke began rising. The Germans were bombarding their homeland. Even at the age of 3, Freddie knew that terror had just invaded their home.
I remember, though, the day that the Nazis invaded Belgium. And it was in May 10, 1940. We all got up early in the morning, and it happened to be on a Friday morning, the eve of the Jewish Sabbath. And we heard bombs falling around the city. The Germans attacked by air first before the troops came in. And I remember my mother waking me up and dressing me quickly. And there was some panic going on in the household. My 2 brothers were at the side, staring at me and wondering what was going to happen to us. And when my mother was dressing me, she was so nervous that she tore a number of buttons from my shirt. And I do remember that. Yes. My father was a streetwise guy, cagey, risky. One of the first things he did was run to the bank and get the money out and get the diamonds out that were in the safe. And he also had the guts to call up some of his clients who owed him money. He knew that we needed some financial resources to get through. He already kind of looked ahead and said, well, how are we going to pay to eat? How are we going to pay to sleep? And he came through. He did come through. And it was difficult to get a taxi for us to escape from Antwerp, where I was born. It took us 3 days eventually to get a taxi. And we just left everything behind in the apartment, the furniture, the photographs, the clothes. We just took a few suitcases with us, and that was tied on the roof of the taxi. And we went to, actually we went to places where we were on vacation before, along the English Channel. And there were hundreds of thousands of refugees already on the road, streaming down from Holland, which was invaded also on May 10, 1940. And, it weren't just Jews who were fleeing, it was farmers and normal people who were scared of their lives. The planes were coming down at treetop level, and they were strafing, the refugees with their machine guns. Those were the Germans. It was tough. My mother telling me that when the planes came down at treetop level and shooting at us, she picked me up, threw me into a ditch, and covered me with her own body. 3.5 years old.
That's a mother's love.
A mother's love is right. Absolutely.
When they reached the coast, Max and an old friend pooled some of their money together to buy an old car. They drove their families into France towards Abbeville as the German troops were blazing a trail through Belgium.
In Abbeville, the car broke down. The distributor cracked. Couldn't get it repaired. The two families parted. We never saw each other again. And as we were walking along the road in Abbeville, there was a truck that was passing by with refugees on it, and stopped to pick us up. I speak a lot to school children, and I want to show some pictures of what it looked like, and have them imagine how I must have felt, running away from the Nazis. But a miracle happened. Of all the photographs, and there were hundreds of photographs taken by newspaper photographers covering the war, I found a photograph of some people on a truck. And I spotted my mom and my dad right away, sitting on the tailgate of the truck. And it was maybe a few days after that, we heard that France surrendered to Germany. And we were in a little village, and a farmer saw us and said to us, if you want to stay and sleep in the barn, you're welcome to do so. And we slept in a barn for about a week, in his barn, and his family, fed us. My mother became sick of hay fever. We slept on hay. And it was one morning then that the farmer came in and said we had to leave because there were rumors that the Germans were coming into the area. And so there were some Red Cross buses that were transporting refugees to various villages, and we got on one of those buses, and we were transported to a town called Pau, P-A-U, which was nestled in the Pyrenees Mountains. We had no place to sleep. We were homeless. So we were taken to a school gymnasium, and we slept there for 3 or 4 days. And one morning, the police came into the gymnasium and ordered us to vacate the place and to get on some school buses. And my brother Leo had told me that, they said that they would take us to some nice places where we could rest up and be on our way. That was in the early part of June. And they took us to a concentration camp. And in Gurs, the town of Gurs, G-U-R-S. And there were barracks of 50 people in a barrack. Barracks were made of 2x4s, slept on straw bed. And the family was separated. The men and young adults, like my 2 brothers, were in one part of the camp, which was divided by a long alleyway. And in the other side were the women and the children. And I remember my mother was scared whether we would ever see each other again. And she was frightened by the Nazis who did come in to inspect the camp to see whether they could transport more Jews into it, especially from the Rhineland, bordering the French border, which they did. We were in that camp not long, 10 days maybe, and that's because my brother Sammy, he escaped from the camp, 16 years old. He told the guard, and the camp was, surrounded by barbed wire, and so it was kind of difficult to escape, but people eventually did escape because there was so much disorder among the French authorities. So my brother told the guard that he didn't feel well and asked whether he could go to the infirmary, which was near the main entrance of the camp. So he saw that the entrance was not guarded, and he walked out. Didn't run, just simply walked out. Because if he had run, he would have cast suspicion on himself. And he was smart enough to realize that at 16 years old. That's why I said earlier he had my father's DNA. He hitchhiked a ride into a nearby town and got a hold of the village mayor and asked the village mayor how he could help get the whole family out of the camp. And the village mayor told him that he himself couldn't, but he could guarantee that if your family did get out, that they could stay in his village. So he told my brother Sammy that he needed to go back to Pau and to talk to a French official who was in charge of the entire region that included the town of Gurs, where the camp was located. A prefect. So he walked into his office and told him what was going on and said, my brother Sammy told this official there is no reason why we should be in the camp. And so the French official gave him some documents to take back to the camp, documents that he signed authorizing the commander of the camp to release the family. So Sammy hitchhiked back to the camp 3 days later, went to the commander's office and showed him the documents, and we were released. An army truck then took us to that town of that village mayor, and he hid us out in an abandoned castle. We were lucky to escape, because if we had remained in the camp by October of 1940, it would have been very difficult, impossible to escape from the camp. The French government regrouped. The head of it was General Petain, who was a World War I hero. and his ministers were known anti-Semites. And it was then that France, whose capital was Vichy in the southern part of France, because the Nazis divided France into two. From the center on up, including Paris, it was the Nazis who administered that area. From Vichy on down, the southern part of France, it was a new French government that administered the area. And they readily began to collaborate with the Nazis, especially with regard to the Jewish question. So in October of 1940, the new government instituted new laws, especially two new laws, one against Jews who were refugees from other countries. They could be arrested summarily and sent to the camps in the area. Gurs was the largest one of the camps that could house 10,000 prisoners, but there were other concentration camps, also referred to as internment camps, where Jews were held. I mean, we were lucky to escape from Gurs because in 1942, the French police began to round up Jews for deportation to the extermination camps. And among them were the 4,000 Jews in Gurs who were still in that camp, who were deported to Auschwitz.
After the Gros family escaped certain death at Gurs, they eventually arrived in Nice, France. This area was under the control of the Italians, and they allowed the Jews to live a relatively normal life. Max and Nasha were able to shelter their family in Nice for about a year and a half. Then one day, the Germans came to town.
In the afternoon of the 25th of August, a young man comes running to the hotel. And we were outside in the garden, and I was riding my bicycle. And that young man, who was a distant relative of my father, told him that we had to leave the hotel immediately because it was going to be raided the next morning.
Once again, Max Gros and his family were one step ahead of Hitler as they finally crossed into Switzerland. Fred Gros became a journalist and has written about these experiences and many more in his book, One Step Ahead of Hitler, A Jewish Child's Journey Through France. Fred has also spoken to hundreds of adults and children about these events of World War II. He is dedicated to making people aware of this cruel part of our global history and the losses that cannot be counted.
I couldn't have survived without the help of Christians. And I will only cite one example. I was in the French Riviera in 1942 with my family. And specifically in August of 1942, that's when the French police began to round up thousands of Jews for deportation to Auschwitz. And the directive was given to all the police headquarters to come and raid the hotels and boarding houses wherever Jews lived, preferably early in the morning, 4 or 5 o'clock. And I was too young to know what was really going on. But I didn't know until decades later what happened at that time. When it came time, the day before the raid, to outline the logistics of how that was going to be done. A policeman contacted a cousin of my family and warned that person that the place where we were staying at was going to be raided the next day. That policeman was not Jewish, but he felt that he had a moral obligation to save lives. So we escaped that afternoon and were hidden out by a Christian family for 6 weeks, a family that my father became acquainted with. Then we had to leave because it was getting hot, as my mother said. And so we fled to the northern part of France. And for a while in Grenoble were hidden out by Catholic nuns in a convent, until it was safe to take passage and to take a train near Geneva, where a Christian gentleman took it upon himself to guide us in the middle of the night to the Swiss border. So here I am, as the senator said, by the good graces of righteous Gentiles. And the fundamental reason that I'm here to support these students is not necessarily to teach about the Holocaust. We know all the images of the Holocaust, but to imbue our young people with a moral obligation to do the same thing that these few righteous Gentiles did for me. There were too many in World War II, and there were too many when Rwanda happened that just stood by and did nothing. And this is the reason to educate these young people about the genocide and about the Holocaust. So when the time ever comes, and hopefully it never will, but unfortunately it is, that these students in back of me and others will stand up and be active against man's inhumanity to man. And I want to end it that way. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Honored to have you celebrate.
Thank you. There were 1.5 million Jewish children who were exterminated in the Holocaust. How many more grandparents, children and grandchildren, there would have been here today? And that's my story.